and Across the Fence, Monuments to Vermont's Past. We'll travel the state to honor those who served in the Civil War. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. More than 34,000 Vermonters fought in the Civil War. Over 5,000 never came home. The names of those who served are memorialized on monuments found on town greens, parks, and cemeteries across Vermont. There are other memory places, like main streets and old farm fields, where Vermont's veterans of the Civil War are commemorated. Many of the soldiers' stories are recalled in Howard Coffin's book, Something Abides, Discovering the Civil War in Today's Vermont. The book was published in 2015. Howard Coffin is Vermont's preeminent Civil War historian and a favorite face on Across the Fence. Welcome back. Thanks so much for being with us.
Nice to be here, Judy.
And so when did you start collecting stories that would go into this book?
I suppose that, it was really almost 70 years ago when my mother showed me the room in the old farmhouse where her grandfather had died, a Civil War veteran. But really, about 12 years ago, my wife and I started wandering Vermont looking for these Civil War places. We found them everywhere, and we had so much fun.
Now, are all 251 Vermont cities and towns represented?
Absolutely. Even Lewis and Ferdinand and Stannard, which used to be Goshen Gore.
Now, in a moment, we're going to visit a few sites, but is there a place in Vermont that is not a monument or a memorial that's steeped in Civil War history?
They're everywhere. One of my favorites is the location of Gifford Hospital in Randolph. That's where the sharpshooters trained. I'm now doing talks on the Vermont sharpshooters. That's the location. Just down across Shelburne Road from Channel 3, there's a railroad spur. All that's left of the Civil War hospital that stood down here. Imagine those broken bodies coming up from the wilderness, Spotsylvania, to be treated here. They're everywhere. I can't drive by Mallett's Bay without thinking that one day soon after the Civil War, Philip Sheridan, the great general, went fishing out there on the bay.
No kidding.
Oh, these things are in my head everywhere.
That's amazing. Now, we're going to take a few minutes to join Howard and Across the Fence's Keith Silva as they visit memorials to Vermont soldiers who served in the Civil War.
The towns that were hit hardest by the Civil War here in Vermont erected the first memorials. Here in Derby Line, this monument was erected on October 31st, 1866. Two speakers at the dedication, Josiah Grout, veteran of the Vermont Cavalry, soon to be governor, and a man named B.H. Steele, who said, 53 of the soldiers of our town lost their lives in the great work, and such lives, young, ardent, promising lives, around which clustered our fond hopes and tender aspirations. The monument has a plaque listing the names of all the soldiers from Derby who served. There are stars beside the names of those who died. There are many stars. One of Vermont's most intricate Civil War memorial stands here on the green in Coventry, dedicated in 1912 and made not of stone but of metal. It has the likenesses of George Dewey, the hero of Manila Bay who won a Medal of Honor in the Civil War at Vicksburg, of Abraham Lincoln and George Garrison Stannard, heroes of Gettysburg, and of Ulysses Grant. It also has the names of major battles. And there's a quotation on this monument that I like. "'Tis a rough land of rock and stone and tree, where breathes no castle lord nor cabin slave, where thoughts and hands and tongues are free, and friends will find a welcome, foes a grave." Brattleboro's Civil War monument on the north side of the village in the town common is one of Vermont's finest. Atop it, a Union soldier looks south toward the old battlefields. The monument is from a grateful town honoring the 385 Brattleboro men who served. It includes a plaque bearing the state seal, a list of many of the major battles in which Vermonters fought, and also there are the healing words of Lincoln from the second inaugural address, with malice toward none, with charity to all. Woodstock honored its 289 veterans by putting an eagle-topped monument by the village school. Years went by and the veterans decided it wasn't adequate, so they put up a new one in Tribou Park on the east end of town. It was dedicated on Memorial Day 1909. 1,500 people were present to see 30 young women in white dresses pull the flag off the great edifice, while the old veterans gave 3 cheers and a tiger. Roar! The monument honored Woodstock soldiers who had fought from Big Bethel to Appomattox, Big Bethel being the first battle of the war in which Woodstock troops had fought. The Woodstock Monument faces due east. Vermont monuments to the Civil War face in any direction, north, south, east, and west. Confederate monuments almost all face north, so as not to have their backs to the Yankees. But the Union won the war. Vermonters didn't care which way they looked.
If you're just joining us, I'm with historian and author Howard Coffin, talking about Vermont soldiers and the Civil War. And you know, most recently, Civil War statues have been in the news. What are your thoughts about the removal of Confederate statues from private places, from public places?
They're going to come down.
Yeah.
They're going to come down in the South because the Civil War was a war that was fought over slavery, and the Confederacy was defending slavery. And African Americans in this day and age don't like that history, and those Civil War statues remind them of the horror of slavery. It's our darkest moment. Yes, they're going to come down. The statue of Robert E. Lee at Charlottesville has already come down. Other Lee statues will come down. He was a slaveholder. He wasn't kind to his slaves. Yes, the South's going to have to live with this.
What do you think should happen to these monuments?
Well, if they're good pieces of art, certainly I think you put them away and save them. They are historically interesting. Certainly I've used them in all my bus tours to guide on. But I think some of them are going to be lost and gone forever, and we can live without them.
Mm-hmm. Well, when many Vermont veterans returned from the battlefields of the Civil War, their first stop was Brattleboro. Let's rejoin Howard and Keith as they retrace the steps of our soldiers.
More Vermont Civil War soldiers came home to Brattleboro than to any other Vermont town, and more went to war from here. This is Brattleboro's busy main street. The soldiers marched along here to the train station, and coming home they marched from the train station right down this street. Pictures exist of Vermont soldiers resting along this street as they returned from 4 years of war. They were taken by George Harper Houghton, the great Civil War photographer who had a studio right in that building. The old Brattleboro Railroad station stood along these tracks close by the Connecticut rivers. The troop trains stopped here. One train that arrived during the Wilderness Campaign was filled with wounded, and it was 1/4 of a mile long. The men who had fought at Wilderness and Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor, who had fought at Gettysburg, who had fought in the Chancellorsville campaign, got off the trains here. In many cases, their loved ones were here to greet them. An unknown Brattleboro poet wrote about the departure of the 4th Vermont Regiment from Brattleboro and then its return in a poem that was published on the front page of the Brattleboro Phoenix in September of 1861. Slowly through the misty street comes the measured tramp of feet, and 1,000 forms sweep by, stepping to the roll of drum. Down the darkening street they come, and the poet concluded, will they tread the homeward track? God in mercy bring them back. Here by the main entrance to the Brattleboro Union High School is the Civil War Memorial, dedicated in 1906. It's here because on what are now the grounds of the school was located the largest of all Vermont Civil War encampments. More than 10,000 Vermont soldiers went to war from here, and many more than that came home here. Here is a soldier depicted all ready to go to war in perfect uniform, and here he is coming home at the end of it all battered and bandaged, but shouting with happiness because he is home back to Vermont. Rows on rows of barracks once stood on these fields, and off in the far corner was a Civil War hospital, one of 3 in Vermont. The Civil War soldiers who camped here before going to war included the men who would fight at Gettysburg in the 2nd Vermont Brigade and win that battle, I believe. The men, when they were here, wrote about the shade of the pine trees, and I'm sure those pine trees off in that direction are the children or grandchildren of those Civil War pines. When the war ended, here they got their discharges signed by their commanding officers. They treasured them, and they've been saved in so many Vermont families. And off they went home to their farms, back to the old jobs, or some to head west for new adventure.
Well, we're back in the studio now with Howard Coffin. Are there any records of how many soldiers left the state after they returned from war?
I think the best estimate is about 15,000 after the Civil War went west. They came home very independent young men. They hadn't gone off that way. You know, they did what father told them on the farm, but now they'd been soldiers, they were men on their own right, and they wanted to run their own lives, and they'd seen farmland that was a lot more level than the Vermont land, and they'd seen warmer climates, and they had a sense of adventure. And they went by the thousands.
Now, we only have a couple of minutes left. Maybe you could remind us of some other sites around Vermont that maybe don't have memorials but are significant when it comes to the Civil War.
Well, you know, I prowl the state, and I'm not shy. If I see an old house and I think, that has to be a Civil War home, I'll knock on the door, and you find them that way. Lakeview Cemetery on the north side of Burlington is probably our best Civil War cemetery. I was up there the other day. It was a cold day, and I went for a walk in the cemetery, and I'm going along the south wall, and I come on something I never knew was there. A group of graves of soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts. These are black Vermonters who served in the Civil War, and a higher percentage of blacks from Vermont served in the Civil War than whites. And these men served in the Great Black Regiment, Robert Gould Shaw's 54th Massachusetts. And there they are. There's a grouping of them along the stone wall. Had I known that, it would have been in Something Abides.
Well, it sounds like you need to write another book.
Well, maybe, or expand this one. But I was awestruck to find them there. And then I found the grave of George Davis, a Medal of Honor winner, won at the Battle of the Monocacy. That site is so much more rich than I thought it was. I'm finding things all the time.
Well, it's wonderful that you come and share them with us. I just love that. If you'd like to discover the Civil War in today's Vermont, you can ask your local librarian for Howard's book, Something Abides. It's also available, of course, from your favorite bookseller. That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.
Additional funding for Mr. Coffin's work for this program was provided by National Life Group.